What's up everyone, I'm Twisted, Happy New Year, and what a year it's going to be for League of Legends. I just watched the new season cinematic, I can't wait to talk about it, but before I wanna talk about the dev video that we got a few days ago. But if you wanna skip to my thoughts on the cinematic, feel free to do so. Last year I made a video speculating on what we might see in League of Legends, Legends of Runeterra and Wild Rift, but you might have noticed that I didn't have much to say about League. Well, that was because there wasn't much to speculate on. We knew about 2 upcoming champions and 3 upcoming updates, and that was about it. But now, after the latest devlog, we have a rough idea about every single champion and every single update coming to League of Legends this year. In this video, I'll be going over all the new stuff mentioned in this devlog, as well as my thoughts on the new season cinematic. So, first things first, we got a bit of Skarner's upcoming lore. He's now one of the founding members of the Yuntal, and he is very suspicious of the outside world, believing Ishtal should remain isolated. I really hope that his personality isn't changing that much. It's already sad enough that an amazing story like Dream Song will no longer be canon, but oh well. Skarner should be releasing in the first half of this year. Shyvana is getting a visual gameplay update in 2025. Considering how long VGUs have taken to come out in the past, I expect this one to be released late 2025, maybe even early 2026 in case things go south. This will be a modernization of the character in terms of lore and gameplay, so more on the level of Udir's update rather than Skarner's. Her lore should remain pretty similar. Smolder is the first champion of 2024. Once we have all of his lore, I'll make a video dedicated to him, so look forward to that. And we got confirmation that after Smolder, we'll be seeing the solo laner Freljord Vastaya. This character was hinted to be themed around rabbits. And after the Vastaya, we're getting Ambessa Medarda in League of Legends. This likely means that she's going to have a bigger role in Season 2 of Arcane, which I can totally see happening, especially if Jinx killed her daughter, Mel. Ambessa becoming a champion is certainly part of Riot's ongoing work to make both the lore of League of Legends and Arcane cohesive with one another, and I think releasing a character from the show who isn't from PNZ might actually have been quite smart. The current lore versions of the Twin Cities have a lot of ties with other regions, especially Noxus, from the Noxian spies infiltrating the clans of Piltover to Singed being responsible for creating the chemical weapons used by Noxus in Ionia. But obviously Arcane is telling a story about Piltover and Zon, so the influence of other regions in the show is pretty minimal. But expanding Ambessa's lore and backstory will certainly make the Arcane version of the region, which is now canon, feel more connected to the wider world of Runeterra as we know it. We're also getting a VGU for a champion that plays a big role in Arcane. The VGU will bring their Arcane version to League of Legends. Again, Riot is trying to make Arcane cohesive with the rest of the lore, so this makes sense. Despite Lexi mentioning here that the VGU is coming in 2025, she later confirmed that it is indeed coming this year. She also mentions how the VGU won't be based on a character's appearance in Season 1, which makes sense since Season 1 takes place in the past. Victor isn't augmented yet, Vi isn't an enforcer, Echo doesn't have his Z-Drive, etc. So it wouldn't make sense to update a champion in-game to a past version of themselves. This also means that it's either a returning champion who's getting the VGU or a champion debuting in Season 2. For example, if Blitzcrank makes an appearance, they might be getting updated in League. From the returning cast, it's kinda hard to see which champions could get a VGU. I think the gameplay of most of them is fine as it is. An ASU would probably work better for most of these, and even in some cases, their animations and effects are still pretty decent despite their base models having aged poorly, and obviously some could at least use a voice-over update. Victor is probably better off getting an Arcane skin now and an ASU down the line, since unlike most of the cast, his animations haven't aged super well. For now, if the VGU is going to a returning character, my bet is on Singed. His gameplay has remained pretty much the same since his release, and his visuals could really use some love. I think a modernization of the character and his kit, like Udyr and Shyvana, is the best route. Singed also seems to be getting a major role in Season 2, while his name wasn't even dropped in Season 1. And if he's going to be tied to Noxus like he is in the current lore, then he and Ambessa might end up working together somehow. But again, the VGU could also be for a champion that we haven't seen yet in the show. Like I said before, a good example would be Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank. We're also getting Arcane-inspired gameplay. This is just speculation on my part, but I assume it's either going to be tied to the Arena game mode or the new Chill game mode that they are working on. And we're also getting more Arcane skins. Hopefully none of them will cost $200, knock on wood. And then we have this amazing teaser for Season 2 featuring Singed and Warwick, which is a clear reference to their story, Engineering the Nightmare. As you can see here, this is one of the illustrations present in the story, and it's pretty much what we see here. We also see Singed holding this pendant, which has the picture of who we are all assuming is his daughter. For now, I'm not buying the Orianna theories, but we'll have to wait and see. Lee Sin and Teemu's ASUs are still in the oven. Lee Sin should be coming out in early May, but Teemu's release date is still not confirmed as the team is taking a bit longer than expected to update him. And finally, this is League's 15-year birthday and celebrations are coming in October. Here's a TLDR of every single new champion and update we are getting this year. We know Smolder is coming out in January, Skarner in the first half of the year, Lee Sin in early May, the solo laner should be after Smolder, and both Ambessa and the Arcane VGU are likely coming around the time Arcane Season 2 debuts, so around November. I think it's safe to expect a new champion or update every 2 months or so Smolder in January, Skarner around March, Lee Sin in May, solo laner around June or July, Teemu around September if he isn't delayed, and then November both Ambessa and the Arcane VGU. Ever since Spirit Blossom in 2020, Riot has been releasing a new champion during their summer event. We got Yone and Lilia in 2020 during Spirit Blossom, Aksha in 2021 during Sentinels of Light, Nila in 2022 during Star Guardian, and Nefiri in 2023 during Soul Fighter. So I think the solo laner is definitely coming out during this year's summer event, which means that Skarner is likely coming out before them, which lines up for his release around March or so. And since Riot X Arcane in 2021 was a month-long event, I can see a similar event happening this year where we get Ambessa in one patch and the Arcane VGU in another patch back to back. And now let's talk a bit about a new cinematic for League of Legends called Still Here. The cinematic starts with the lamb talking.
Tomorrow is a hope, never a promise.
And this is actually one of the lamb's quotes in League. The cinematic then shows us Tryndamere, and we saw a bit of this scene in the teaser for the cinematic, and since we knew Aatrox was coming, I really thought that this was going to be the moment where Aatrox and Tryndamere meet for the first time, but that wasn't the case. There isn't much to say about this scene just yet, because it will quickly transition to the next scene, which is with Kayle and Aatrox. Something different that they are doing with this cinematic is that they let the scenes play out in full, instead of swapping back and forth between locations and characters. So we start with Tryndamere, then we go to Morgana and Kayle versus Aatrox, then we go to Yasuo, and then we go back to Tryndamere, and that's it, which is interesting. Definitely gives the cinematic a different feel. And the next scene that we have is with Kayle and Morgana, and I'm not sure how I feel about their designs. They are certainly more Demacian, but I think Morgana's helmet looks really out of place here, and Kayle barely looks like Kayle. Back when Kayle and Morgana were updated for League of Legends, we got a bit of insight into Kayle's design in a Q&A that was done for their release, and one of the writers mentioned how Kayle's final form in-game is what she currently looks like in Runeterra, and her appearance at the start of a game is what she looked like before that. And we can see in the Mage Seeker game that indeed Kayle in the past used to look like her default form in League, but then Legends of Runeterra, they depicted Kayle in her initial form during the Dark King Saga events. And you might say, oh, but maybe this artwork takes place in the past, except we can see Zolani's corruption all over here and the messengers sent by Mihira, so this is very likely takes place during the same conflict as Kayle's level 2 artwork, which is a bit sad, but then again, it was only ever mentioned in that one Q&A. Another hint that this takes place in the past is that Morgana still uses her wings, they are not bound yet, and here we can see Aatrox fighting the sisters in Demacia, which I wasn't really expecting to see. I always thought that Aatrox was sealed somewhere in Freljord, which would have explained how he met Tryndamere. But well, I really hope we get more context about this, maybe a written story if those were still around, you know. The same way I'm not the biggest fan of Kayle and Morgana's design, I'm also not the biggest fan of Aatrox's design. Also, we can see here that the swords that both Kayle and Morgana are using don't look anything like the swords from their mother, which split in two. And you might say, oh, but maybe this is a different sword, but why wouldn't they be using their mother sword, right? If I'm not mistaken, their powers were only like awakened or activated when their mother's sword fell from the sky. Again, I think it's just a bit of a weird design choice, but besides that, besides the designs of the characters, I think the choreography of this fight is super well done. And then we have this moment right here where Aatrox throws the sisters away, which I think might be a reference to the first ever cinematic for League of Legends, where Morgana throws some projectiles at Kayle and Kayle is sent flying, and you can see here that she loses her helmet. And guess what? That's also what happens in this new cinematic. Another thing worth pointing out here is that the style of this animation is similar to the one from the Call, which makes sense because they were done by the same studio, but I have to say that I much rather prefer the more stylized art style from Arcane, from the Tales of Runeterra and other cinematics, rather than this one. And you can see here that Kayle looks nothing like Kayle. She doesn't have her light blue grayish hair, she doesn't have the hairstyle, she looks like a completely different character. Morgana is still at least a bit recognizable because of all the purple that she's wearing, but I don't know. I know this is supposed to take place in the past, but I wasn't expecting them to look so different, right? Like here, I think she looks so generic angel, right? Also, a cool detail that I just noticed, Kayle is now wielding her sword and Morgana's sword. That's a cool detail. But yeah, to defeat Aatrox, Morgana uses her chains, while Kayle uses her fire waves from her passive in League. And the flames are a transition to Ionia, and this was the scene that had me the most confused. I mean, the previous one was really confusing, but this one was really confusing. Initially, this character shows up and like by the design alone, you can tell, okay, this character is clearly related to Yasuo in some way. And I was like, okay, this is probably not going to be Yasuo's father, but maybe this is Elder Soma, which was Yasuo's mentor, which would have made sense because this character also uses wind techniques in the cinematic. But then this whole scene wouldn't really make sense because Elder Soma died during the first invasion of Ionia, and these bad guys here are clearly not Noxian, right? Well, as a lot of people pointed out, this is likely Old Man Yasuo, an older version of Yasuo. And I think all of these scenes with arrows are a reference to the first, I would say, major season cinematic, which was the climb, and the climb started with Yasuo being attacked by arrows. So yeah, I'm confident this is Yasuo. We can see here the scar on his nose, the hairstyle is pretty much the same as Yasuo. We can also see the flask and the sword. And now you might be wondering, why are they showing up Old Man Yasuo? Well, I think what they were going for with this cinematic was to show us a moment in the present with Tryndamere, a moment in the past with Kayle and Morgana and Aatrox, and a moment in the future with Old Man Yasuo fighting these generic Ionian bad guys. And you can see here that right at the end of Yasuo's scene, a shadow starts to form, which looks very similar to the wolf part of the Kindred, which obviously means that Yasuo is probably going to die. We can see here one of the arrows hitting the camera, maybe implying that he died or that he's very close to dying. And speaking of dying, we return to Tryndamere. And obviously a big part of Tryndamere's character is the fact that he manages to, well, not die, right? And we see here that he starts seeing the lamb and he starts seeing the wolf. This usually happens when you are near death, but I don't think that this battle that he's having with the lamb and the wolf is actually happening. I think this is more like a metaphor, right? Yes, maybe he's actually seeing the lamb and the wolf, but he's actually fighting the water warrior scene in the beginning. If we see here, See, we see that the transition shows us that Tryndamere was actually fighting all of these dudes, right? He wasn't actually fighting Lamb and Wolf, at least not in a literal sense, right? But he was fighting for his life, and he was very close to dying. And then we have this amazing moment where Ashe comes out and the scene lights up with hope, and Tryndamere's rage disappears from his eyes. Beautiful scene. I think a lot of people are going to be happy. I'm really happy about these two. But yeah, Mortality, I think, is one of the themes of this cinematic. Obviously, with the Kindred narrating and the Kindred graphics being all over this season's promotions and videos, obviously mortality and death are going to be a theme, right? Especially with Yasuo almost, if not actually dying in the end, and with Tryndamere escaping death. I think there's a clear theme of mortality here. I'm not really sure about Morgana, Kayle, and Aatrox. As far as I could tell, there was no like reference to the Kindred in their scene, but that could be because they are all immortal. Sure, they can die, but they are probably not going to die of old age, right? So I wonder if that was intentional or not. Regardless, after realizing that this is indeed Old Man Yasuo, everything just made a bit more sense to me. I have to say that I really wasn't a big fan of the part with Morgana and Kayle and Aatrox. I think the three of them don't really look that good, but the fight scene was really awesome. The part where they fly up in the air and they fight with Aatrox, this is so well done. I don't know why Aatrox even has wings. He's not using them, but he's flying, but whatever. I think that part is really well done. But I think my favorite has to be Tryndamere fighting with the Lamb and the Wolf, and then Ashe comes and basically brings hope into his world, right? She basically saves him from death. This was my favorite part of the cinematic. But yeah, this was every single new thing that we got so far for League of Legends. Let me know your thoughts on the new dev blog and on the new cinematic down below, and tell me if you are hyped for League of Legends, because let's be honest, last year was a bit of a rough year for the game. Definitely didn't start well, and then we had Arena, which was awesome, and then we had $200 mythic scams, which was horrible. But yeah, let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.